Welcome to the podcast. It's dedicated to making you a faster cyclist. The Ask a Cycling Coach podcast presented by TrainerRoad. I'm Coach Jonathan Lee with our head coach, Chad Timmerman.
Hey, buddy.
And we have Santa Cruz and Monster Energy's Keegan Swenson.
Hey, guys.
And we also have a new guest with us today, Team Movistar's Matteo Jorgenson. Good to have you, Matteo.
Hey, pleasure to be here.
Do I have this right? You are like an occasional podcast listener, or you've listened to the podcast before? Something I remember hearing that you like reached out and about something like that before.
Yeah, I do. I always like listening to people's viewpoints on science and stuff. And yeah, I've listened to many TrainerRoad podcasts on my rides.
Nice.
That's right. Heck yeah, that's awesome. You have a lot of time to do it. You do a little bit of bike riding. I'm going to run through and introduce you for the people that don't know, although chances are anybody that follows pro racing knows who you are, especially after watching the tour this year. You had some awesome racing to watch. Super fun. But anyways, professional American cyclist for the Movistar team from Boise, Idaho, which is pretty sweet. Do you call Boise home still, or do you a different area?
Yeah, Boise. Yeah. That's where I'm from.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Awesome. Killer. So Palmares in 2019, first in the points classification of Tour de l'Avenir, which is like the junior tour, if you will. It's known as like where a lot of teams look to find the best next thing, which is pretty exciting. 2021, 8th overall at Paris-Nice. 2022, 4th overall at Tour de la Provence. You got 2 fourth place stage finishes at the Tour this year and 1 fifth place stage finish at the Tour, from super impressive breakaways, if I may add. Chad and I are like the ones that I'd say in terms of all the podcast hosts, you and I follow pro racing the most, and chatting
amongst the hosts. Yeah. There's a number of people at the company who are really well versed on the World Tour and Pro Tour. Yeah, for sure. But amongst the podcasts, we're definitely the most knowledgeable.
Yeah, and Chad and I were very excited watching those breakaways, Matteo. You were driving it and just racing is so awesome.
Yeah, we had such a good American showing all around. I mean, we had like 4 or 5 hitters, American hitters, in so much of the action that went on. It was just it did a fella proud.
Absolutely.
Thank you guys.
Yeah, of course, man. Thanks for doing it for us. I mean, you didn't really do it for us. Do it for yourself, but still. So we tell ourselves. 4th in the white jersey classification at the Tour de France and 21st overall. I believe 21st. I saw another thing that said 20th. I don't know if you have that straight.
I don't even know. Quintana just got disqualified, so could be 20th.
20th. Top 20 instead of top 21.
Yeah, who knows? Doesn't really matter.
Anyways, suffice to say, you have you're a rising star for our country here in American cycling, but doing it at the biggest stage in the world, which is the World Tour, and it's just amazing to watch. And it's a genuine pleasure to have you on here. I can ask first, though, did you get your start in mountain biking or road riding? Because we have Keegan on here who has done some road racing, but really mountain biking and gravel is his main thing.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I probably started both at the same time. I probably started more on the mountain bike, actually. I started with the Birds, a little club in Boise, and yeah, they start with the young kids on the mountain bike. So I probably started on the mountain bike, yeah.
And how far did you go with mountain bike racing? Did you ever go to like national championships or anything for mountain biking?
Definitely. Yeah. I kept mountain bike racing until I was 17 or 16 or 17. I went to nationals like every year until I was probably 16 years old.
Wow.
And then
Killer.
Matteo, what was the talent recognition pipeline for you? You said you started with the Birds.
Yeah. I started with the Birds, and yeah, a few
which is like Boise Young Rider Development System, right?
Squad. Yeah.
Squad. Awesome. Squad. Yeah, tight.
Yeah, great program in Boise to get kids started in riding. And yeah, I started there, and then a few guys basically ahead of me in the Birds, like even my brother and some of the guys older than me, they were getting into the USA Cycling Development Program, which at the time was better funded than it is now. And they were going over to Europe like at 15, 16 years old. So yeah, I was seeing that when I was young, and I kind of made that my goal to try to get over to Europe with them. And to do that, I just had to it was convoluted how to actually get there. But I just try to get results in road races in the US. And eventually I made it over when I was 15 with the national team to do some kermesses. And then I went to hot tubes. And when I was 16, I was on hot tubes. And from hot tubes, we got to go to bigger races, some races in Europe, even like Ireland. And that in combination with the national team basically was all just to get me to Europe. That was like the biggest, the biggest goal, and the way to actually go professional was to get over to Europe. So that's what we did.
Keegan, do you ever remember racing Matteo when you were younger?
No, I think our age difference is too much. I think I've actually raced. Yeah. We were talking about this the other day. That I might have raced with his brother a little bit.
I think so.
We're closer in age. I think he's a year or two older than me. But I knew Matteo because you were like friends with the Putts, and I kind of like in Idaho, Utah, we're all kind of doing the same kind of thing. So like, I don't think we'd ever really met or exchanged much more than like a hey, but
Yeah. And you guys have linked up on some training rides recently, hence why we have both of you here on the podcast together.
Yeah.
So what do you think of Keegan's training grounds, Matteo?
Oh, it's great. It's good. Better than I expected. It's super nice, especially on the mountain bike. I went mountain biking yesterday and I was pretty impressed. It was sweet.
Yeah. Dream territory for it. So I want to get, are you interested in doing gravel racing at all? Or like, actually, before we step into that, before your personal opinion, what does the pro peloton think of gravel? Like, because, and I'm going to draw a parallel to soccer, strangely here, but if you're a really good soccer player and you're in the Champions League or you're in any number of the different leagues over in Europe, the UK, MLS, like American soccer, has become like the retirement plan. So what you do is after a really good career over in a larger league, what you do is you go to MLS and you are a huge signing for a team. You get a huge amount of money and it's for like 2 years or so. And you really don't even have to play that well. You just like, you show up and you're the name. So it ends up raising the profile of the club. And that's kind of how it happens. And they view like MLS as like this, maybe when I'm retired, or maybe when I'm less competitive, that's what I would go and do. Is that how the World Tour views gravel? Is like, maybe when I'm retired sort of a thing? Because we haven't seen as many top riders come over to it as I kind of anticipated would.
That's a good question. I think a lot of it depends on who you ask. But I would say the Euro guys for sure. Like if we take Americans out of it, the Euro guys definitely consider it that way. Or I don't even think they consider a retirement plan. It's mostly the American guys that do. The Euro guys, I guess, kind of think of it as, just a way to, just a different part of cycling. I don't know. I haven't spoken with many of them about it, but I guess I know their attitude towards putting like gravel sectors or whatever into road races, and they're very against it. And it's like, I get why. It's like you're basically adding in a bunch of factors that outside of road racing that aren't usually there, and you're basically just adding in a lot of luck into road racing, and especially stage racing where it doesn't a lot of times need to be. But it's all for entertainment. I mean, that's what this whole sport is about. So I kind of see it as more positive than they do, but a lot of them are quite negative on that sort of stuff. But honestly, I think a lot of the Euro guys are probably mostly just unaware that gravel, like how big the US gravel scene is getting and how much it's growing over here. And in Europe, it's mostly like they do have, I think, a UCI gravel something World Series or something. And they mostly look at it as a joke or as a Grand Fondo, sure. I think.
Yeah. Now, Keegan, like you come from the US gravel or mountain bike scene, now gravel scene as well. How do you view World Tour racing? I'm curious about your perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's always been like in my mind, World Tour racing is like the top level of the sport. I mean, it has the most eyes. I mean, World Cup mountain bike racing is obviously quite big as well, but it definitely doesn't have the attention that World Tour does. Like the Tour de France is like a household name over here, whereas you go to some random, and likely that's all because of Lance, but you go to some random person, they're not even going to know what cross-country mountain biking is. So I think, I mean, whether mountain bikers want to admit it or not, I think it is the top of the sport. So yeah, I mean, I've always been curious about it. It's like, looks like it's a whole different, it's like kind of a different world, like Matteo said, like the Euros don't really even know aside from a few, they don't really know what's going on over here. And it's funny, we kind of see the same thing with the UCI World Gravel Series. It's like Unbound is like gravel world championships. Like it's the biggest gravel race in the world, so I don't know. It's funny to hear. It's got kind of the same opinions. Like racing gravel in Europe just seems it is. I think it's more treated like a Fondo. Maybe it's going to become racing. I don't know. But.
Yeah. It's interesting how that differs from the fans. The fans view like World Tour racing as like traditional, kind of like like stuffy and like not cool. And this counterculture movement is gravel. But when you talk to the athletes that are doing it at the high level, it's very different. The perspective that they have on it, you know? Yeah, changes. Okay, so I want to talk about a couple different things. First, Matteo, I want to cover the rider type question because you have a lot of athletes that always ask like, how do I find my rider type? That, you know, or this is who I am, thusly, which rider type am I? And for you, watching you get into breakaways in big mountain stages, but also do well in days when you guys are just rolling the flats really hard. Do you have a rider type that you identify with? Did you have one growing up? Did you develop into one as a professional athlete?
Yeah, that's no. Well, to answer your first question, no, I don't think I have a specific rider type right now, which is actually pretty rare in the World Tour. I think most guys fit well into one category, and they'll tailor everything towards that. At least in the World Tour, and no, I haven't figured it out. I guess the first 2 years when I turned professional with the team, they didn't know either. And we kind of approached it with the strategy of like, okay, we'll just start you in every type of race we can. So we'll try to do spring classics and then try to do some stage racing and get you into Grand Tour as soon as we can. And then we'll see kind of where you do well. And from there we can hone it down. But it hasn't really worked. I guess that strategy, it just kind of made me curious about all racing. I think I've performed pretty well in almost every type of racing. I definitely don't have a sprint, so we can take that out of the question. But yeah, I've struggled. That's a question a lot of people ask me very often is what my rider type is, and I don't even really know. I think the only thing I can tell people is that I really enjoy training in the mountains and I enjoy climbing a lot for training and racing as well. But nowadays, to be a climber in the World Tour from a numbers perspective is almost out of the question for me. It's just I'm a little bit too big and tall, and when you talk to people, it's like, yeah, I'd have to lose like 5 kilos to get there. So it's just kind of a pipe dream. But I think when you have a strong ability in the climbs, you can do a lot in World Tour racing, and you don't have to be a pure climber to excel there and make the best of it. And like from the tour, get into breakaways on those medium mountain or mountain stages, and try to do well.
Matteo, you strike me from having watched you for some time now as an all-rounder. You say you can't sprint, but I'd be willing to bet you can sprint quite well from a small group. Still no? Okay. So maybe a slightly lopsided all-rounder, but it kind of seems that the course that good all-rounders go, if they're not GC all-rounders, if they're not at the high, the pointy end of things, is to be a Baradeur, to be the guys who do exactly what you do, to seize a stage from its inception, knowing that there's going to be a bit of climbing, a lot of rolling. You're going to have to be able to lay long, steady power down, sprint a bit if, it comes down to it. And that's, to me, who you seem to be. The type of rider you seem to be.
Definitely. This year's made it a bit clear. I just watched, I guess I've been close enough to the GC riders to see kind of what it takes to do GC at a Grand Tour or even a 1 week stage race. I've tried myself in a few 1 week stage races, and it's just a really brutal place to be, in my opinion. Like you just have to sacrifice so much of every other aspect of the sport. And I just see a lot of those guys, it's a very specific thing, and there's so many guys trying to do it that it's a really tough challenge. So I think for me personally, I'm way more inspired to go and chase stages at Grand Tours and stages at 1 week stage races and even 1 day races. It just seems like something that is just a bit more exciting to me, and racing GC where you're just every day going to the well to not lose time and just try to like hold the wheel of those in front of you just sounds brutal mentally, and something that I don't really ever want to do, especially for 3 weeks.
Yeah, no doubt. Do you mind if I ask some numbers on like the sprinting side of things to give people some context? Like when you say you can't sprint, What's your max power, whether it's, 1 second, 10 second?
It's like 1100. So
Less than I
I
would
would say it's like
expect.
1100 for 5 seconds, and it's like 1100 for 30 seconds. I don't even have a peak really.
I see.
I can do that power for a really long time, but it's like in a sprint scenario, that doesn't, at least in road racing, that doesn't really even matter. Like a really long sprint, maybe if you have the perfect scenario where it's like a slight uphill drag and it's after whatever you're going, it's after 5 minutes really hard or something, I might be able to do it. But 1100 in the world tour is basically the lowest you can get. I mean, guys like Bardet that you see that you'd expect would have no punch or anything would outsprint me easily. They probably have a 1400 watt sprint, and they weigh a lot less. So yeah, it's a tough ask at 1100 to try to win any sprint, but it's something that I've tried to, I guess, consider and I haven't really trained towards it because I asked my coaches and stuff if it's even productive to try to train that sprint and up it by a little bit. And a lot of them just tell me like, no, I mean, it's mostly a genetic factor, and it's a lot to do with like your lactate production and how your body handles it. And yeah, to try to train it and like maybe make a 5% improvement to get to 1200 or something, it would take probably something off of my other abilities. So we just haven't even really touched it. I try to do some sprints here and there on endurance rides, but just to keep those muscles awake. But other than that, I'm just kind of accepted that I probably have to win a race solo.
Yeah. So what is, and you can use, because I'm sure it's evolved and changes over time, but looking at the tour this year, for example, and we're going to get into more like aligning your peak and everything for that in a bit, but looking at this year's performance at the tour, what is your strength in terms of duration? Like, were you really good at 10-minute, 20-minute, 30-minute, even longer efforts? Like, what were you best at during the tour this year?
During the tour, I think it's hard because you're comparing yourself against guys, that specialize in all these disciplines. But I think I did probably the best in, those longer efforts, like 30 to 60 minutes. It was what I also trained for like 2-3 months before, very specifically. I basically had a really long runway into the tour where I wasn't really racing and I had an injury. So it was just a perfect time to like step back and just train for one thing. And we ended up just doing a lot of those really long efforts on long climbs. And so I ended up probably excelling on, longer climbs there. But I think in general, my best power output is between, like, if you just look at numbers on a chart compared to other guys, is probably between 5 and 15 minutes, 5 and 10 minutes even. That's probably where my best power is. But then when you put me in a race with specialists, it's like I can't compete against like Wout van Aert on a 5-minute climb or a 10-minute climb. So yeah, in the tour, it was like once you get into a breakaway, you take away you're only racing against 20 guys, and then you have to look at, okay, what of those 20 guys can do 30 minutes at this power. And then I think I was probably best at those longer climbs.
Got it. Keegan, have you seen your power profile like change? I mean, with mountain biking, you kind of always have to have a bit of punch, right? But so you've probably had that from the beginning, but you've done a lot of longer stuff now where it's like the punch might be less important. Has your profile changed? What are you best at?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny. I think my single effort punch has almost gotten better because it seems like in gravel racing, when you go, it's like really when it counts. It's almost more like towards a road racing style. Whereas for XCO, like we really trained repeatability a lot, right? So it was like you'd have to get really good at doing 500 watts for just a minute or so, but you just do it over and over and over. Whereas, in gravel racing, I feel like you're doing a lot more tempo sweet spot, and there might be like a couple efforts where it's like 5 minutes flat out, which actually that Unbound out was like the split at like mile, probably 120, 130. It was like it was 5 minutes to the floor. So I feel like, and then now gravel racing, there's a lot of sprints at the end. So yeah, it seems like my efforts have changed a little bit. And also I'm just not training the repeatability quite as much as I used to. Just focus more on endurance and
So what are you best at right now, do you think? Like in terms of a power profile perspective?
I mean, for me, it'd probably be long, like, it's hard to say. probably like longer climbs right now, just with like how I train for Leadville and nationals and whatnot. So I think, that like 30 to 60 minute like effort. I'd say that's probably right now. That's probably my best.
So Keegan,
interesting, right? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Chad.
Well, Jonathan told me a while back that you had shifted your training more toward tempo and sweet spot and longer days. And I was always curious if you did that in anticipation of shifting over to gravel, or were you doing that just because you had plateaued in other ways that made you good as an XC racer?
A bit of both. I found that training works really well for me for XCO as well. So it's kind of hard to say. Like I've had some of my best XCO races just off, like a couple 30-hour weeks. So it's like, I think for me, I've found just having a bigger motor is helpful. Like maybe my repeatability is not quite as good, but I can ride at a pretty high pace the whole time. And so it's hard to say exactly, what came first there. Because we kind of switched to like the longer, more higher volume training. And it just so happened that I was also like kind of switching more toward gravel, but I still
Gotcha.
I still, the fat tire crits and whatnot, I can still throw down a pretty good, like 30-second sprint and whatnot. So I'd say overall, it's kind of made me almost more well-rounded in a sense.
Kind of interesting, right? How like Matteo, you and Keegan both, you guys prove that specificity matters, right? Even though you'd think that as you get and probably to the pointiest end of the spear, that genetics start to just predefine, what you are best at. But at the same token, specificity still matters, Yeah,
it's
pretty cool to see.
Like training for Unbound, it was just focused on long, sweet spot efforts on the flats. And then we switched to Leadville, start training for climbing, and you just get better at it and you lose weight. And so I think you can still kind of shift. You can't shift dramatically. Like I could never, like Matteo said, I could never sprint with the top sprinters in the world, but I'd probably win a sprint out of most small bunches. So like you can kind of get better at things, but you're not going to totally shift what you're good at to a certain extent.
Definitely.
Matteo, why is racing in Europe such a hard nut to crack from your perspective? I think maybe Keegan's shared this, maybe on the podcast. I can't remember if you have, from your perspective, Keegan, and we'll get into that. Even if you have mentioned it before, we'll get into it. But Matteo, from your perspective, because we see a lot of athletes from our country go over there, and it's hard to replicate success that they have, or even, I want to define success a bit more, like replicate or their ability to be able to perform to their potential seems handicapped, right? When they go over to Europe, and they just can't do it. They can't express their potential. What do you say about that from your perspective?
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot. It's the biggest challenge in going to Europe. I think it all comes down to how the roads are made in Europe, and how that affects the race. So basically, roads in Europe are way narrower usually and way more chaotic. So you have road furniture. The road they basically a lot of times are paving over what used to be a dirt path between villages. So the road doesn't take these logical like straight lines between places. They just take how the path was originally created. So the roads will be curving without really logic and kind of narrowing and widening at points. Yeah, that doesn't really have reason, but it just creates a racing scenario where positioning is in road racing the most important factor, at least in more so I would say in U23 and junior racing than pro racing. I mean, pro racing obviously positioning matters, but once you get to pro racing, there's a lot. Yeah, you have a team around you to help you, and it's just a different task. But in U23 and junior racing, when you're actually trying to make it a professional in Europe, and you're kind of on your own. I mean, almost every guy is. There are some nations or teams that can do well and help each other out with positioning, but a lot of times the racing is so chaotic that you end up, everyone's just a solo rider and you're all trying to get to the front before whatever X key point. And so it creates a scenario where when positioning is the most important factor in the race, everyone knows that. I mean, that's not a mystery at all, and it creates super stressful racing. So everyone kind of knows where the points are, where you need to be, and so everyone knows that you have to be there, and so you end up accelerating long before those points, and then the racing is just dramatically different than an American road race, where it's like basically in most American road races, the East Coast is a little bit different. They have different road structure, and the roads are, slightly different than the West Coast. But a lot of the racing in the US that I've done are on really wide and straight roads most of the time. Mm-hmm. And you basically there's no challenge in moving up. You can move up whenever you want to. The road is so wide that you can be 10, 15 across a lot of times. And it's like, it more comes down to the numbers you can do, because it's like, if you can move up whenever you want to, then it takes away the stress component. And then you enter the climb, everyone's more or less fresh mentally, physically, and you just kind of do the, if it's a mountaintop finish, you do the power numbers you can do, and that's that. Or if it's a sprint finish, then you have plenty of room to have a lead out train and do your sprint safely. Whereas in Europe, there's just way more factors. It's like you can spend so many KJs getting to the last climb of a race just in mistakes positioning, or if you're just slightly too stressed about whatever, or you can just waste a bunch of energy, and then you arrive at the last climb and you think the numbers that you think you can do for 15 minutes, and you'll do 100 watts less because you'll be toast. And that's what a lot of, I think, the mistakes that everyone makes when they first come to Europe as Americans is, it's like you don't really know, you haven't raced over there at all, and a lot of these guys have for 10 years before you, like a lot of the Euros, and they kind of know what an actual key point is and what a key point where you don't have to be up front, and they know the tricks to positioning and the things that take kind of years to learn. And so they just have a huge, a leg up on you, and they know how to race it, and it's very much technique based. So a lot of it's like, these guys will in training be able to produce numbers that they'll never, for years be able to produce in a race until they can figure that out. And a lot of guys, I guess, double down on, okay, I need to learn the positioning and the technique, and they go and try to race a lot. And that's usually what helps you get there as a professional. Then there's some guys that double down on training, and they think, okay, well, I just need to become a lot better, I need to like grow my motor a lot so I can arrive, at the last climb a lot better. And I don't see that working a lot of times. I think that's the mistake most guys make, is that they try to go and train the house down afterwards because they think, oh, these guys are just so much fitter than me, or so much, just in a way better place physically. But I think most of it is that they just know how to arrive to the key point a lot fresher.
And then Matteo, to probably further the anxiety of what it's like being in the European peloton, and probably to complexify the task of moving around, moving up, just holding position even. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like the fields over there are quite a bit more tightly knit. Like riders seem to ride so deadly close to one another, whereas with the American road races, it's probably a product of what you just described. The roads are wider, they're more predictable, so they don't have to bottle up like that because they're not all bucking for position. That just has to make that whole job that much tougher.
Definitely. It's a product of that. It's a product of how the roads are built. And it's like, when there's a road and you can only fit 4 wide, it's like people are gonna be way closer to each other and try to fit as close as possible, and everyone's fighting to be in the front. So it's the same thing. It all comes down to how the roads are made and how it affects the racing. It's just a completely different it's just a completely different thing.
Mm-hmm. Is any of that similar, Keegan, does that cross over to cross-country Olympic mountain biking, and why that in and of itself is also a tricky thing to decode?
Yeah, honestly, I think it's exactly the same thing. Obviously it's slightly different because you're not racing on pavement and whatnot, but honestly, it's like the same thing. If these guys have been doing it so long that they know how European racing works, and how like you just have so much more talent shoved into this small course, right? So there's 150 guys that you line up for a World Cup, or even just like some C1 or HC race, and everyone's fighting for position for the first. Basically, you're fighting for position the whole race, right? There might be some places where it's chill, but even then you're going flat out to try and hold position before the descent, or maybe you want to be in the front before a climb. And it takes some time to just learn how to race over there and how to be aggressive and hold your spot. You're starting in the bunch with the wide handlebars, and like it's pretty hectic. And it took me a long time to even get close to cracking that nut. And it's mean, it's a similar experience in a way. I mean, it's different, but it's all, in the end, it's all positioning and just how aggressive you can be and knowing where to move up and knowing where it's efficient to do that versus just using your power just to roll through the field. So I think a lot of those guys are just so much better at it than Americans are. And I think over here, I think it's starting to get a little bit better. Like the kids now, like they're racing with fields of over 100 when they're racing at US Nationals, and even the smaller cross country races have pretty good sized junior fields. Whereas when I was a junior, like there was 30 or 40 kids. So I think to get that experience, you had to go to Europe, and now they're, I watched like the US Nationals start and it looks just like a European junior start. These kids are just going flat out, So I think it's cool to see that it has changed a little bit over here in the sense that maybe they'll be slightly more prepared for when they go over to Europe. I mean, sure, the tracks are different, like way more aggressive and way more technical and all that's a whole, like technical side of things is a whole nother like can of worms that you have to figure out how to do. Like it took me a long time to learn how to ride in the mud and the wet roots and rocks and stuff. Like I'm a great bike handler over here in the dry, but then, going to Europe as a junior, it's just like a whole new experience. Like I'd never ridden wet roots in my life, really, So, I mean, I came back after I got my teeth kicked in a few times. I came back and just like, whenever it would rain, there was like 2 trails I could ride in Park City that were covered in roots and stuff. So you just go to repeats and you just figure it out, And then when you go over there too, sometimes you're like, well, I'm just going to go intentionally go ride in the rain on the most technical trail I know, so I can take advantage of like actually learning how to do this. It definitely paid off. Like now, I wouldn't say I'm quite as proficient as the European riders in the rain, but I'm like good enough that I'm not going to lose a race because of it. So sure. I still don't enjoy it. I don't love racing in the mud and stuff, but I can do it if I have to. So I think that's translated over to, marathon racing and gravel as well. It's the same kind of thing.
Yeah. So I'm going to flip the coin. Are we uniquely good at anything here in the States that would, if the European riders came over, that they would have a hard time with, Matteo?
Yes. We are really good at training. That's one thing I've really noticed is that Americans, just because I think there's less racing opportunity here and you grow up racing maybe 10 times a year, if you're lucky, as an American, maybe in California a little bit more, but most guys on the road are racing so few or so little that they end up, becoming really good at training, and you learn a lot about how to train yourself without that racing stimulus. And so, I think a lot of these American guys go over to Europe and they're just shocked at how, they talk to their teammates. If you're on a European team, it's like these guys know nothing about physiology or training or whatever, and it's like they're way better than you still, and it's like how is that possible? And it's truly like mind-blowing. It like turns your whole worldview on your head. You're just like, because as a kid you're just like, I mean, at least I was very conscious about everything I was doing training and what numbers and this and that, and you go over there and you talk. I mean, I went over when I was U23. I was on the AG2R development team, and I was the only non-French guy on the team. And these guys, they would race 60 to 70 days as a junior, from 13, 14 years old, they're racing 70 days a year. And it's like, when you're racing that much, you have a bit of training in the winter, but it's mostly just aerobic conditioning. So they would do like, hikes and skiing and Nordic skiing. And like, they would just do anything that just gets their heart rate up for any amount of time. And a lot of them wouldn't even record it. I mean, they weren't like, a lot of them, for example, they'd ride on the road bike and they didn't even have power meters, or the team gave them power meters and they didn't even connect them to their Garmin. And it was like, these guys were doing, things in races that were incredibly impressive. Like a lot of them are really good pros now. And they didn't train with power until maybe 1 year before they turned professional, and it's like, I think that's something Americans have a leg up on, is that we also have a culture of like teaching training science and having good coaches. And that's like one of the staples of being a good athlete here, is you have, a good coach, and you're very disciplined about your, zone control, and you stay within your power zones and whatever. And over there, it's just a very much racing culture. So they're way more concerned about how you perform in a race than how you perform in training. And that's, I think, the big difference is In the US, we're very conscious about how we perform in training. We're trying to impress a coach, or because it's all we have. We just don't have the amount of racing.
Can I ask a question, Matteo, and this is like an absurdly vague question, so I apologize, but I have confidence you'll take it in a good direction. But how do you get in breakaways? And the context I'm talking about is the breakaways that you are in the Tour de France. Does the Grand Tour context change the breakaway and like how you get into breakaways?
Totally.
I mean, for most of us average folks, when we're in a race and a breakaway happens, it's probably a bit different. But I still bet that we could learn from the circumstances and context that you face. So how did you get into the breakaways at the Tour?
Yeah, it's a super complicated thing. It's something that has frustrated me so much over the last 3 years of being a professional. In the World Tour, it's something it's a very unique thing, getting into the breakaway. It's like, there's a weird balance of teams controlling it. So a team, usually the leader's jersey team or the team that people think will lead the race in the future. So in the first few days, it's like, there's nobody in the leader's jersey, or maybe there is someone, but it's a sprinter and they're not actually leading the race for GC. So people look at a team, with the quote unquote favorites for the GC of the race, and they look at them to control. So there's this weird balance of like, okay, we have to respect. There's just like a weird respect in the peloton, and it's a very old school sport. So it's like, there's a team controlling, and then there's guys trying to get away, and it's a very push and pull thing. And some days it'll go. The hardest part for me in these World Tour breakaways is that sometimes it'll go the first attack, right? So there's a red car neutral zone. Everyone's on the red bumper of the red car accelerates. Guys are sprinting into the draft of the car, and those 6 guys get away. And then there's a wall up and you can't go, right? So some days that'll happen. Some days it'll take 90 minutes, 2 hours for it to go. And it's completely unpredictable. There's no way to know. That's kind of the thing that I've taken peace in, is that there's literally no way to predict it. Your directors will have an idea of what's going to happen for the day in the bus, and they'll tell you, in the meeting, we think on a stage like this and with this team controlling, it's going to go quickly. It's going to go in the first couple moves. So you better be you better be first row in the neutral, and you better be in the first attack if you want to make it. And 50% of the time they're wrong. It's like, there's no way to predict it. So in my mind, what I was trying to do in the Tour is like, you pick a few guys. That's the best way I would find it. It's like, you pick a few guys that you think are interested in making the breakaway, and B, have the ability or are good at making the breakaways. So like a guy like Leonard Kamna, or I don't know. There's just these guys that are consistently in the breakaway, and it's like, okay, you kind of watch them, and still it's not bulletproof at all. I mean, they can miss the breakaway 50% of the time too, and they do, and you can tell they're sometimes the wall goes up and you see guys and they're just like pounding their bars, and it's just like once the problem is, once the wall goes up, once enough guys at the front say, maybe there's a team at the front kind of blocking, or there's just enough guys who are tired or whatever, it's like once the wall goes up, then there's this respect thing, and it's like, if you attack through the wall, it's super disrespectful, and it's like
rolling through feed zones, maybe.
Same type of deal. It's like it happens, and weirdly, like the smaller teams are allowed to do it. So like if Total Energies or if Arkea misses the break, they'll kind of slip through the grass on the outside and attack solo to the break when it's still at 30 seconds, and nobody will, like, there might be a few guys yelling, but it's more or less accepted, because it's like, okay, that's their main objective in the race, is to make the breakaway, and a lot of time they're not the favorite for the race, so the teams are like, okay, it's not a big deal. But when I do it, or when a guy on a World Tour team does it, I mean, it creates a huge fuss, and a lot of times, you'll have the leader of the race attack and get onto your wheel to shut you down, and then yell at you, and it's just not worth it. So yeah, it's a very complicated thing, and I know that's not a good answer, and I haven't figured it out myself. Yeah, I did make it into a few breakaways in the Tour, and the way I did that was marking a few guys, and then all those days I made it were days where it took 2 hours for the break to go. So it ends up taking so long. You're attacking and going full gas for such a long amount of time that it ends up going more or less on legs. So like it goes and goes and goes, and the group is getting slowly strung out, and there's enough guys like doing efforts to where it's like guys will do a couple efforts and then get, just kind of slide back in the peloton because you just can't stay up front that whole time because it's a super chaotic place up front. So a lot of times once it doesn't go for 20 minutes in at least in a Grand Tour, it won't go for 90 minutes. So that if it hasn't gone in the first 20 minutes, you just kind of wait. You wait in the front and you try to be in the big splits that could go, but you try not to spend energy. And then once it gets down and you see guys are really on the limit and you see guys are like starting to really suffer around you, that's when you start attacking and participating. And that's the way I made it. It was just like, you go when others can't. I mean, you make the split when simply guys, even if they wanted to go with the break, they couldn't. And it just ends up going on fitness and then that's the other problem is you enter the break and you're already kind of on the limit. And all three of those days that I got on the break, I was, I entered the break and I was almost full gas when I got there. I was like, completely spent, and we still had over 100K to go. But you have to think those days, almost everyone is in the break. No one had an easy ride to get there.
And then Matteo, the days that you think the break's going to go early, maybe your sport directors have tipped you off to that possibility. It's got to be pretty tough to position yourself at the front then, right? If people know the break's going to go early and they all want to be right behind the lead vehicle, it's got to be basically what we just described, fighting for position and just anxiety for what could be a 15-kilometer neutral.
100%. A lot of times the neutral zones are super chaotic and dangerous. Exactly. You have either some climb that's in the first 10K of the race where everyone's like, okay, that's where the break's going to go. Or sometimes we start on a climb and it's just like, the first move that goes is probably going to be it because it'll be easy to block the road. It's a narrow road, whatever. So in the neutral zone, you just have guys, kind of kamikazing, you have guys like jumping up on the sidewalk, swerving back into the bunch. And it does become super, you just have to kind of be those days. If you want to make it, you just have to kind of be an asshole about it. That's what it comes down to is you have to kind of push guys out of the way and make room for yourself and not let guys in behind you. And it's not super nice environment in those neutral zones. I'll tell you what.
That's
familiar.
Is it similar to gravel or mountain bike racing, Keegan? When you say that?
I mean, the gravel's a weird dynamic because sometimes you have the women in the bunch as well at the front. And I mean, you have to it's weird. Like there's this weird dynamic at the gravel races. Like obviously it's aggressive and everyone's packed into the front. And there's like amateurs who probably shouldn't be in that mix. And it just it's weird because you have to be aggressive, but you can't be like overly aggressive like you can when you're racing other pros, or those of the same sex. It's like it's just a weird thing. I don't enjoy it. I wish everything was a little more separate. But then there's neutral starts in mountain biking as well. So there'd be at some of the marathon races I've done in Europe, there'll be like a neutral start the first 5K. And you have there's like 80 riders packed behind this car or a motorcycle. It's the same thing. People are jumping on sidewalks and they're trying to jump back in. And you have the entire field, whereas if it was like you were racing, it would just be strung out because someone would be willing to go or a teammate or whatever. But when it's neutral, you have the entire field packed into like this tiny little bunch and everyone's trying to get the draft of the car or the motorcycle. And I've seen like straight up fights, like people pushing each other around. And it sounds like it's a very familiar thing because then when the neutral drops, it pretty much that means like single track is like a couple 100 meters away or a small fire road. So then you're racing for that. And it's like, instead of racing for the break, you're racing for the whole shot and everyone's all like pent up and anxious. And some of these guys might not have ever been in a bunch like that. So you have that side of things as well. And sounds oddly familiar, I guess.
We've talked a lot offline about Leadville, Keegan, but was the Leadville start chaotic and scary for you? I don't know if it is. I don't know if you're just perfect here at the front. I think everyone kind of sits behind you.
Yeah, I mean, I think Leadville, the start's short enough and it's downhill and it's fast that I think for the men, for like the strong guys at the front, it's quite easy. Just you're like, I'm just going to take wind. You just got get small and like you just, you can ride 300 whatever watts into the wind. Whereas the women, they can't play that game. They can't just like roll to the front and be like, oh, it's only 15 minutes. It's worth just doing this to stay out of the mess. So they're like back in the scrum fighting for position with like amateurs there, and man. Like
it's chaos
and the men, like, like it's chaos back there. Like I'll look back and like you see like, you're just like, I'm glad I'm not back there. Like I can't imagine what it was like for Sophia the first 50 miles of Unbound, because like they're not big enough to make the holes and they don't have the horsepower to just like roll up the side like we do. So it's like, yeah, it's just got to be horrible. But at the same time, I feel like there is some level of respect, at least among the pro men, that like you give the women like a little bit of a bubble, because in my mind, they're racing their race and we're racing ours. So you don't want to like disrupt what they're doing. And so I think that's kind of the common thing among the men. Maybe the amateurs, it's everyone's for themselves. I don't know what happens then, but
yeah, man, it's chaos. It's Hunger Games back there with all of us. Yeah. So, I want to talk about timing peaks, because one thing I noticed in your interviews that you had mentioned, I believe a couple of times, Matteo, was like, you came to the Tour de France this year and you mentioned that you had that injury and then you had that long block of kind of uninterrupted training. So no racing coming into it. But you mentioned that like you had timed your peak with the Tour and that's why you were frustrated at fourth place, because you knew that you were capable of first place with the form that you had. And so, but I want to talk about timing that, because one thing that I've noticed, and I want to get both of your perspectives on this. One thing I've noticed with less experienced riders is they do, and Chad, I'm sure you've noticed this too, they err on the side of doing too much coming into an event, whereas a more experienced rider always seems to leave themselves plenty of room, and they would err on the side of doing less rather than doing too much. But I want to ask the very basic question to see where you take it, of how do you time your peak so that it lands on the most important days?
Okay, not to derail you, but before we get to that, does anybody come to the Tour without peaking for it? Are there riders there who are just riding through the Tour de France?
Not the Tour. Tour.
Okay.
There are guys that have made mistakes. I mean, that come to it, either too trained or whatever, but they all try to make their peak the Tour for sure.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right, back on track.
Good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, great.
I mean, look, I don't have I'm not a sports scientist here or coach. All I guess I know is my experience doing it. And I did the Giro last year. That was my first Grand Tour. And I basically, me and my coach together, it was just a huge mistake. And so from that, I kind of learned the Giro last year. Basically, I trained really well all winter, and I ended up being in super good form at Provence and Paris-Nice in 2021. And so at Paris-Nice, they saw I was in good form, and they wanted to, or before then, they saw I was in good form coming into Paris-Nice. And so they didn't really have anyone else to contest the race. Other guys were doing Tirreno the same week. So they're like, okay, Matteo, we're going to give you a big shot, and you're going to, race GC at Paris-Nice, which is obviously a giant opportunity and something that I didn't want to take lightly. So me and my coach together, we were like, okay, we just go all in now for Paris-Nice. So in the month or two before, I did, a ton of intensity and a ton of really, really hard training in February to get in good form for Paris-Nice and try to target the GC there. And I did. And Paris-Nice was 8 days. And it was like my first time ever doing GC for, such a long race. And especially at a World Tour level, it was just a ton of load. Basically, it was 300 TSS for 8 days, 300 or more TSS for 8 days. And
every day, you're saying? Yeah,
every day for 8 days. Yeah. And so, I came out of it shattered. And the team was like, well, I was 8th GC in Paris-Nice, which for me was a huge step. And it was a huge result for me. And for the team too, they saw, that was super good. And so they were like, okay, well, we'll take advantage of this form. So they're like, oh, you're in great form, which is what happens in these World Tour teams. Like the manager of the team are sitting there, and they're having meetings to discuss calendar. And it's very, for them, it's like, well, we have this guy who just was 8th GC in Paris. And it's like, okay, even if he's a little bit tired, he could probably take that form and go to a lower level race, because that's Paris is a World Tour race where, it's highly contested by some like the best GC guys in the world a lot of times. And so they're like, okay, well, he could take that form and go to a 0.1 race and probably win. So they were like, okay, now you'll do Toby Bartley, which started 7 days after Paris and was another, I think 6 or 8 day race or something in Italy. And it was a 0.1 race. So it was a lower level race. And so, yeah, long story short, we instead of resting after Paris, we kind of just try to keep the quote unquote, keep the engine running, which is like the worst mistake you can make. And yeah, I mean, I just kept training and went into Kobe Bartley and, you know, really went deep every day there, even though I was not performing super well, didn't do well. And so after, they were like, well, okay, we should probably rest a little bit from that. But it's like, if we can take this big block of training from the spring and we can convert it into the Giro, you can do a really good Giro. And so it's like, okay. So the kind of the train just kept on going. Right. And so I was like, okay, I'll take Kobe Bartley. And they're like, you just need to absorb these 2 races you did. And then we'll go to altitude and we'll train for the Giro. And I was like, okay. So I didn't take rest after Kobe Bartley. And I kind of went straight to altitude afterwards, went straight up to Sierra Nevada with the team. And we did a month in Sierra Nevada where I wasn't really performing great in training, but I had the depth to be able to kind of do it all and do it all well enough. You know, it was like, we had Mark Soler as a leader. So I wasn't like so super stressed or concerned about performing myself, but I trained super hard and I literally started the Giro the most tired I'd ever been in my life, you know, on the first day of the Giro, for the first stage of the Giro, I was completely shattered, you know, and it was like, it was like from the team's perspective, they've seen, you know, like the team's been around 40 years. So they've seen tons of guys do this. And from their perspective, it's not a big risk. They're just like, well, you either absorb it and you do super well or you don't and you do badly. And yeah, I ended up having like the worst Giro ever. I was just like completely pack fodder in the gruppetto every single day in the gruppetto. I didn't have one single day where I was, you know, decent at all. And it put me in a hole for months afterwards. Like I came out of the Giro and had to take like 3 weeks completely off the bike. And even then I wasn't recovered. And it took me until the fall to even start doing well again. So yeah, all that being said, I came to the tour this year like super conscious of because seeing that Giro was like, you know, I saw in the 3rd week what would happen. It was like guys were just all on the limit. And it was like, you know, you see these opportunities. It's like everyone's completely screwed because everyone has a job in the first 2 weeks, right? Everyone's helping their GC leader or doing lead outs or a GC leader themselves or a sprinter. And so you enter the 3rd week and it's kind of like this weird thing where everyone's really tired, but everyone's on different levels of fatigue. So you see like, okay, if I'm able to be in that 3rd week second or 3rd week with good legs and I did it right, it's like, you know, you could win a stage. It's like, it's not, everyone's performances are greatly blunted by that usually. And so, yeah, that was kind of my motivation this year to like come to the tour with good legs and fresh enough to be able to like take the 1st week, take the 2nd week and get into the 3rd week with, you know, similar performances that I could have done the 1st week, not actually accumulate so much fatigue. And so, yeah, I ended up doing well with the injury, which is funny to say, but you know, I tore my hamstring at Paris this year, 2022. And so I had to take like 3 weeks off after that. So it forced me to rest after, you know, a big winter and a big Paris because I had the same kind of lead in. They wanted me to target Paris as GC and whatever. So I was forced to rest. And so I kind of came out of it and was like, okay, if I can just, you know, train well to the tour and not accumulate too much fatigue, it'll be good. And that's kind of the only way that I know how to time a peak is just like, don't go to the well too many days beforehand. Don't, you know, you just have to train well and manage that fatigue. So like, even when I went to altitude this year before the tour, we were doing 1-day blocks in order to not accumulate fatigue. So we'd have one really hard training day, like 1 6-hour day. And then we'd have a rest day or a recovery day, 1 6-hour day, 1 recovery day. So it's like, in that way, you kind of you make your peak a lot slower. So you're actually building fitness at a slower rate, but you're accumulating way less fatigue. So you're not actually going super deep day in, day out. And I think that helped me a lot. And especially at altitude where you have these additional stressors like altitude and in that case, I was also doing like heat training. So I was just adding in a ton of extra stimulus. I think it helped a lot to do such little blocks. It's like you just do a lot of intensity, but you don't do these 3-4 day blocks where you can really go to the well and do a lot of damage to yourself. And yeah, I mean, that was just all that is just listening to your coach, I guess, and just having a good coach, because I wouldn't know how to do this stuff on my own. Like timing a peak is like a magic thing. It's like physiology is not super, it's not set in stone. So you can't really, there's no formula to it. It's like, you just have to watch yourself and see how you feel. And it was like, yeah, I never felt like I did in the whole spring of 2021 this year. So I knew that I wasn't fatigued. That was the only way to do it.
And then Matteo, how closely coached are you? Does your coach you, and I would assume a few other riders? Is any amount of your training entirely up to you? How's that work?
No, we have, so basically in the World Tour now, there's a rule where you have to have internal coaching. So you have to be coached by team staff. So you have an internal coach with the team, and he coaches, I think, 6 other guys in the team. So he has 6 athletes, and that's his full-time job. And yeah, okay. It's very closely coached. I mean, I'm in daily contact with him, and I don't have a lot of say in it. Like, I mean, I could if I wanted to, but I like to put my trust in the coach. Like, I don't have a degree in this. I didn't go to school for it. So I like to just kind of, trust 100% what he says, and just try to give him as much feedback so that he can do his job well. And so, like, try to just tell him how I'm feeling all the time, tell him how the day went, but leave it all up to him, because I don't like the idea of coaching myself, where it's like, I just don't think I have enough experience or knowledge to be able to do it.
Or bandwidth. I mean, you've got enough on your plate without having to figure out your own training.
Yeah. So like the principles that I'm getting from that, the basics are, don't overestimate your abilities, like coming into things, like err on the side of giving yourself more rest than you think, which kind of jives with what we say. For a lot of time, people are like, oh, I can do a high volume plan or a mid volume plan, but we recommend that people go a bit lower than that and see how that works out first. But then also, when you come into things, make sure you give yourself that easy sort of rest. Keegan, how about you? Because you've had this Lifetime Grand Prix this year, which in most cases has had the events somewhat spread out. Whereas with cross country Olympic, sometimes you'd have like 3 weekends in a row where you would be racing over in Europe, and it'd be kind of like, and then like a big break, and it'd be kind of interspersed. What have you learned this year about peaking? Because you've clearly done it, like you've managed to, I don't know if you're racing on peak form, but you're managing to race with really good form on these big days.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to what Matteo said about just like managing fatigue. I think all these races are pretty big, like Unbound was, I think it was 600 TSS or something, so it's like these huge days, like you have to really manage your fatigue out of that. And maybe you think you're ready to start training again, but you're I thought I was ready, and Jim, the coach, is like, let's give you like a few more days and just make sure. And then when we start training, it's like one day on and then one day off, and then, one day on, and then you're like, okay, now we're feeling good. So we can do a 3-day block. And I think you really have to give yourself a little bit more time than you're used to recover from these big events, especially when they're stacked. I had like the 24-hour solo, and then I barely got recovered in time for Cape Epic, then did Cape Epic. And I think these big races kind of catch up. So it's just a matter of managing fatigue and at the same time trying to stay fit. And I think it'd be like, it's hard doing what some of these other athletes are doing, trying to mix in XCO as well, because that's like a whole nother, it's like just so intense. And these weeks of XCO training, you have to like rest so hard into the race. And then the race is like, it fatigues you, but you don't get a whole lot of like training stimulus out of it. I think, I don't know, it's this weird balance. So for me, I've found like definitely more rest is better after, and then I can actually hit it pretty hard and come into the race like slightly fatigued. But I think you just have to find this balance of, like rest and training. I rely heavily, like Matteo as well. I rely on my coach pretty much for all that. I mean, like he'll ask for my opinion. Like, do you think you're ready to start training or whatever? And like, well, if I think I'm ready, he thinks I'm ready, then we're probably both on the same page. Because sometimes, you're excited and you want to get back to it, but you have to maybe like, all right, you ready? Let's give yourself 2 more days and then we'll actually start training. So it's been just balancing that between these races. Like you said, they're spaced like kind of weird. They're spaced like a month and a half, which is like enough time that if you start training like right after one, you might not get recovered in time for the next. Mm-hmm. So, and if you like rest too much, then maybe you'll lose that fitness you had. So it's been this balance of, rest and recovery pretty much all season. Like I built a huge huge foundation this winter, especially with these big races I did. And you kind of just carry it the rest of the season, and you're kind of like slowly going up and down. I don't think for the series I've ever had like one big peak. I definitely like was targeting, Leadville and Steamboat that weekend, but at the same time, like I had mountain bike nationals 2 weeks before. So I think like you're just, I've been just trying to ride in this wave all season and trying to like maintain a level of fitness without going too high or too low. So
sure.
Cause like I think our racing's a bit different, that like on the road sometimes, you'll just like your job is just to maybe have a certain job for the first, 100K or whatever, then you're just doing whatever. But for us, you race every race to win. So it's, especially with the Unbound, like the Lifetime series, you go into every race and have to win every race, or you try to. So it's a little bit different as well. I think the way you have to peak and train for them. So
sure. So what I'm getting from that is the importance of the subjective feedback from both of you guys too, in the sense of like, you can have the plan, but you need to pay attention to what you're feeling, and you need to make those adjustments appropriately for that when you go into things, and best err on the side of caution.
And
can I ask?
I think the feedback is huge. Like I had a day after Unbound where I was just supposed to go do 5 hours of zone 2, which is it's a relatively easy day for me. I should be able to do that almost any time. And I barely made it back up Big Cottonwood. Like I was so shattered. Like I was like, I was just cruising. I was like, I have to ride 150 watts all the way home. This ride's going to be 7 hours. And that's just the way it is.
Welcome to living like the rest of us, Keegan.
Yeah.
So,
and then, two more days off and I was ready to train again. So I think,
but that's such a strong point, because your training it's a living, changing thing. And if you're not constantly communicating those changes to your coach, then you're flying blind.
Or in this case with TrainerRoad, with your post-workout surveys, right? Like that's
there's
like
got to be feedback.
You have to have that feedback in there, because otherwise, and it's easy because we're all super ambitious, right? So we'll drive ourselves into the ground with the best intentions. Like it's not like we're, doing anything, ill-intentioned for sure. It's just how it goes.
No, totally. I think what Keegan said too there about like those days after you race where you just went, like, I think people don't realize how much deeper, at least me and Keegan were talking about these the other day in a ride, like, in a race, you can go way deeper than you can in training. You usually, at least we were talking about how we usually do our best numbers in a race. So it's like, if you think about that, you're doing way more damage to your body in a race. And that's one of like the biggest things that I talk about with other more experienced pros. And when I ride with them is like, they just have learned that it's just a total myth, this idea of like keeping the engine going. And I remember talking with Larry Warbass about it, and he was just like, that time when I got really fatigued after Paris-Nice, he was just like, dude, you just need to rest. Like like there's nothing else to it. You just need to rest. And I was just like, I argued with him, and I was like, well, I just did such a good ride. It's like, I should be able to absorb this pretty well. It's like, clearly I was in good form to do the good ride, but it's like, no, if you went that deep, you need to wait until you can effectively train. So you just have to sit there and be really patient after races. It's one of the hardest things to do, but you just have to literally sit there and be super honest with yourself until you can actually, you think you can actually train. And then even if you go out on the bike and you feel you can't do it in the first few efforts, just pull the plug, just go home and train. I mean, it's like, go home and rest. It's like the most important thing I've learned, probably.
You can just bury your fitness in that good form and fatigue, and then it's useless. So I think the biggest thing Jim has told me before is like, fitness doesn't just evaporate, right? Like it doesn't just go away. So like if you have a really, like Matteo said, you had a really good Paris-Nice, that fitness isn't just going to evaporate over the course of like 3 or 4 days of like really hard rest, right? Just like completely chilling. You just need to make sure you like dust that fatigue off, and then you'd be ready to go for the next weekend. But if you just keep training through it, like I'm the same way, like, oh, I just gotta keep the engine running. Like I'm going good. Like we'll just keep going. And you end up just buried in fatigue. And then when you have to go deep at the race, like maybe you trained through it and you felt fine, but when you actually have to go hard and dig deep, you just don't have anything there. So
so when you feel flat, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Pride has no place in the adaptation process, right? Like
no,
it's a physiological process, and try as we might to re-engineer it with our own pride and brains, it doesn't really work. Another question I want to ask you, Matteo, is how to fuel a Grand Tour. How much are you taking in terms of grams of carbs per hour when you're on the bike? And then what are you eating afterward when you're off the bike in the midst of a Grand Tour?
Yeah, Keegan and I were just talking about these the other day. I think it's been a big change just in the last like 5-10 years, at least in the World Tour peloton, of how much sports science has entered and just kind of told everyone in these teams how much more we can take in. This year, I started this year with a new nutritionist where everything's controlled, and I've had, basically going into the tour, I had like 5 months where I weighed everything I ate, and I learned a lot about myself. And I just learned how important it is to be precise about it, at least at my level. In the tour, we were on the bike. I've learned that I can, err on the side of, at least when you train your gut and you're adapted, I always err on the side of taking in more carbs, because I almost never have an issue of over, stomach upset if I'm well trained. And we have such good nutrition products now that are so pure in carbohydrates and don't have fiber and these other things that can really slow down your digestion, to where it's like, some of those days in the break, I was taking in 160 grams of carbs an hour. So like two bottles of 80 gram bottles of carb per hour, plus a lot of water to digest it. But I probably wasn't, according to the science, I probably wasn't taking all that in. I was probably, my body was probably taking in what it needed and then just wasting the rest of it into my intestines. But it's like, I would way rather, especially in the context of a stage race where it all builds. So any day, if you go, if on any day of a stage race you have a deficit, it compounds as you get into the race. So it's like, even if on day 3 I'm 1,500 calories in deficit, but I'll start feeling that day 7 when your glycogen stores and whatever just aren't quite as full. So I would always err, at least on the bike, and this is what pretty much all pros now in World Tour teams do, is just err on the side of eating as much as you can. So as much as you possibly can have your gut trained for, because you're, even with the intensities we're riding with, even with 140, 160 grams of carbs an hour, you're still creating a deficit on the bike. So it doesn't, you're still not replicating if you're still not putting in as much as you're taking out. So I would err always on the side of eating more. And then after the stage, we do it so precisely now where it's like, I know exactly what I ate in the morning, what I ate on the bike. And then after the stage, they kind of give me a readout of how many, based on like the tests we've done and the metabolic profiles I have, they can give me a readout of like pretty close of exactly how many grams of carbs I burned on that ride or that race. So basically after the race, we take note of that and we see, okay, if I ate this much for breakfast, this much on the stage, this is how much I have to replenish for the rest of the day. And so, when you're precise about it, it's like, it's after the ride where you can modulate that stuff. It's like, if you ate too much on the ride, you can just have a little bit less after, but it's always better to eat, as much as you possibly almost can fit, during the race, because you just never know what's going to happen, right after that. If you're taking in 120, even when it's going easy, 120 grams of carbs an hour, 100, even when you're riding easy, it's like, you don't know that in the next 5 minutes, there's not going to be something huge that happens and where you're going to need it and, not be able to replenish it. So that's what we were doing, is just eating as much as possible. And I think that's what every World Tour team is doing.
What sort of normalized power would you be having, like on the days when you were in the breakaway at the end? And because what I'm getting at is, like you said, it's impossible to fill the void, right? Like Definitely. You're burning way more. But what sort of normalized power were you doing?
Probably like 340, 350
for like 5 hours,
6 hours. Yeah, those days in the break, at least, because you're just kind of you're pushing all day. It's like the fight to get in the break. You're at, you're doing normalized threshold almost for a couple hours, and then you kind of settle down for maybe an hour, and then you have the final. So it's like, at the end of the day, you're almost doing, you're doing like a tempo normalized power the whole day.
That's like, so you're just draining carbs. So you're 160 grams Definitely. Even, which is a ton. It's still, it's not finishing in a deficit, not even close.
Yeah. And it's nice with these tests that we do now. It's like these metabolic tests. They can tell you, like, we do a test where they can tell me at exactly, like, each power zone, exactly how many grams of fat and how many grams of carbs I'm burning at that power zone. So it kind of gives you an idea in your head while you're racing to know, like, okay, if I'm looking down at my power meter right now and I'm doing, 350, 400 watts, I'm burning way more grams of carbs than I could possibly eat. So it's just like, it gives you a confidence of like, I'm not overeating. And if you are riding or racing hard, it's almost impossible to overeat while on the bike. It's all done afterwards. It's all done in the time, when you eat lunch, dinner, recovery, where you can go back over and create a surplus. But on the bike, it's almost impossible.
And this shift toward precision nutrition it's such an interesting one on so many levels. But I love the fact that I think we're going to see fewer and fewer bad days. I mean, people are still going to have bad days, but we're not going to have athletes on high-level teams, on world tour teams, world teams that have that bad day because they didn't nourish right. And if they do, they only have themselves to blame.
Totally.
You can't tell me there's a team in the world tour that doesn't have a nutritionist. There simply can't be. They're not going to be able to compete at that level.
No, it's a big change, and it's one of the reasons I think our directors point to why the racing has gotten way faster in the last 10 years.
Yeah,
everyone is fully glyced up. I mean, it's like nobody in the last hour of a race now. Almost everybody is competing at the level they to their potential. Right? No one's suffering from. I mean, it happens some days where. And it's like some days your body just doesn't digest what you're taking in. I mean, that happens. Some days in races you're just empty. No matter. I mean, I've eaten 300 grams of carbs for breakfast, and then had 120 in the race, and just not even been able to break threshold some days, just because your body, your body gets fatigued and it gets tired, and some days you can't do it. But if you're fueling right, you just take away 90% of that guesswork, and you're just giving your body all the tools it needs to perform if it possibly can.
Well, long term, it's going to build healthier athletes too, and it's going to keep you guys healthier longer. So when you do head into retirement, you're not doing so with a body that's just been beaten the hell up over the course of however many years you've raced at this level.
Totally.
Yeah, it's a smart take. Keegan, you've upped yours too, right? Over, I guess, the past 2 years, really. You've probably upped your take.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's probably been the last 4 years for me. It's really seen, like, I've just slowly like I can handle 80 just fine. Then we went to 90 to 100, and that's fine. And now we're like 120 is good. And now, like today, I'm over 130 most of the time. So
it's crazy.
I think you should train it. You can't just like all of a sudden like I'm going to take in 130, 40 grams of carbs an hour. It's like kind of a big process. Like, and you have to keep doing it. If you take a few weeks off from training, it like you can definitely feel like you have to kind of get back into the rhythm of like ingesting that much on the bike over like a fairly intense ride, at least, or if it's a really long ride, either way. And I think your body slowly gets back to getting used to taking in that fuel. So
for sure.
But yeah, it's definitely made a big difference. I don't feel like, training and racing, there's less days where like, you still have days where you just feel bad, and sometimes it just doesn't go well, or like you feel like you're kind of cracked, but it's not because of fueling. It's either because of, maybe you're slightly, you maybe should have rested a little more or whatever it may be. It's nice to not have to, it's not your feeling on the bike that's the problem. So it's like one less piece of the puzzle that you're like trying to figure out what's wrong. So you're like, okay, well, I know this is fine because this is what I always do, and it always works. So it must be something else.
Whether it's, and one key thing you said, Matteo, was the fact that we have nutrition products that are so purely concentrated with just giving you glycogen, glucose, fructose, and salt, and that's it.
Yeah.
Because we see it in whether it's, Martin, SIS, Endurance, Never Second, there's like a bunch of different brands now that have these very concentrated, simple foods that gels or drink mixes that just, it's designed for it. Because we get a lot of people asking, like, how in the world do you take this in? And they're like, I brought 4 honey stinger waffles, like 4 Cliff Bars, and like all that. And it's like, no, like.
And each of those companies is developing its own ecosystem too. They recognize that we have to pair this with the right amount of carbohydrate in the fluid mix, with the right amount of carbohydrate in the bars and in the gels, because they all have to work together.
Totally.
Yeah, and any extra stuff like that you're piling into your gut that isn't sugar and salt, like in its most pure forms,
just gets in the way.
Just wasted. It just gets in the way. It slows things down.
Yeah. No, that's a pretty funny. Yeah, a lot of people ask me, they're like, no, I try to, because I tell them, like, people ask me, they're like, oh, like how much do you eat on the bike, whatever, and I'm like, oh, if you're doing if you're doing a training day with intervals or whatever, I would try to eat 120 grams of carbs. Like, they don't ask me, but they go out and they try to eat like 5 Cliff Bars in an hour. And it's just like, they just like, it's like the craziest thing to them, because that is crazy. There's tons of fat and protein in each one of those bars. So it's like, all that's not helping you in the moment that you're training, for sure.
Yeah, they're going to hang like a whole bushel of bananas on their bike, right? So, all right, last question on this one. Matteo, you have a teammate sitting pretty in GC right now in La Vuelta de España, and I want to know your take. Well, Chad and I both want to know your take on the race. Like, if you think Remco, because he's never done a Grand Tour and finished, at high up in GC or anything like this. In fact, I don't think he's finished a Grand Tour. Is that correct?
So, no, he DNF'd the Giro last year.
Yeah. So do you think he's going to be able to hold it? He obviously is flying right now, but we're, effectively just at the end of week 1, really.
Yeah. That's a super, I mean, Remco, look, he's a freak of nature, the kid. I mean, he does numbers that nobody else can do, but I think also in a Grand Tour context where, I've seen it firsthand what these GC guys have to do day in, day out. And it's one of the most impressive. I mean, it is the most impressive thing I've ever seen in sport, is that these guys can replicate performances every single day for 20 days. And I think it really does take a special genetic profile or mental profile or something. But I think we'll find out if Remco can do it or not this Vuelta. I think he's had the preparation that he's needed to be able to figure it out. And we'll just see in that. I think it'll come down to the third week when it all adds up and these guys start attacking him. But it's like a guy like Enrique, I know his biggest strength is that he's uber consistent. He's like super, super good at maintaining those, even if he doesn't have probably the peak performances that Remco can do, he probably couldn't match the numbers Remco can do on a one-day race up any climb or whatever. But it's that third week in a Grand Tour when, Enrique is used to coming back and he can still produce what he did in the first week in that third week. So we'll see. I'm just super happy to see Enrique doing it because, the Tour was a pretty negative experience for him. And he has had a bad season with he's crashed 3 or 4 times on the exact same side on descents. So he just lost a ton of confidence in himself. And at the Tour, it all kind of came to a head when he just couldn't in the group, pretty much do anything. He wasn't positioning well. He wasn't descending well because he was just scared to ride his bike. It was a tough Tour and to see him go home with all that criticism after the Tour and people just, all over the place saying he's rider and whatever and that he doesn't deserve X and Y, and then to come and do start doing a Volta like this where he's clearly gone back home, worked hard and gotten his confidence back on descents and whatever. It's cool to see. It's I hope he continues and finishes on the podium like he did last year at the Volta.
Heck yeah, that'd be cool. I'm going to get into 2 questions from listeners really quick. We've gone longer than I expected, but the conversation's been great. Hopefully y'all are good with this. But Aaron says, do pro riders still cramp or is it just us amateurs? I've done big events like Tour of the Dolomites and never cramped, but I started cramping at Leadville halfway up Columbine and it turned what I thought was going to be a 10-hour day into 13 and a half hours. Absolutely brutal, says Aaron. Keegan, I want to lead off with this one since you were at Leadville on Columbine. The question, do pro riders still cramp?
Yes. Flat out. Yeah, we do still cramp. I'd say it seems like it's gotten less likely with the better nutrition, like we mentioned earlier. I think if you stay on top of your carb intake and, your hydration, I think cramps at that point, then they only happen near the end of races when you're flat out and you've used everything you have. But it does seem like they've kind of gone away a little bit with the better nutrition. I still cramp. At the end of Leadville, the last 20 minutes or so, I had my legs started to have they weren't locked up, but they the cramp twitches. And then same at Steamboat, I had some twitches the last probably last 5 miles, and then after the finished sprint, I fully locked up after I crossed the line, legs just locked up and I couldn't move. So normally that's when it happens for me is after a sprint, because I think you just you're just dumping glycogen, right? You're going so hard. And I think, and your muscles just aren't used to after riding tempo at Leadville for 6 hours and then doing more tempo with like not a whole lot of efforts at Steamboat. And you go ahead and sprint, your body just like, no, what are you doing? So I think, it does still happen. If you just stay on top of your nutrition, obviously you can't go harder than you should either. So maybe at Leadville, maybe your nutrition was off, or maybe you like went harder than you should have earlier in the race, and that can play a big role in it. So if you ride above your level, then you're likely to cramp.
Everyone's
so
on like 7-hour pace. When they go up St. Kevin's,
right.
Everyone's 7-hour rider, right? Like,
we're riding it like it's a 5-hour race, so everyone's doing it. You just have to kind of find that balance of maybe I should back it off just a little, So
for sure. How about you, Matteo? Were you cramping at all in those Tour de France like breakaway days? That must have just been brutal.
Yeah, at the Tour, no. And I never used to cramp as a kid either. I was never a guy who cramped. I'd always have, it was always more aerobic. Like I'd have I just cap out on breathing or whatever before my muscles went. But in the last few years, I have started to cramp actually. Weirdly, like when I started doing these longer races and heat and stuff, I have had issues with cramping, and it all was just a hydration issue. I have a very particular, I'm super light skinned, and my genetics are super bad in the heat. Basically, I just dump a lot of, I just sweat a ton, and my sweat is super high concentration in salt. So if I don't control that well and I lose enough salt or water, I'll cramp pretty badly. But in the Tour, I was super, super on it with that stuff. So I never cramped, surprisingly, even though it was the hottest Tour of all time, I think.
Yeah. How much sodium do you take in an hour? Are you keeping track of that at all when you're on the bike?
Definitely. I take 1,700 milligrams an hour if I'm riding hard.
Wow.
So I'm way above the normal ranges. That's one of the things I learned in Andorra before I went to the Tour. Is it's been a problem for me my whole life in the heat, and I'd never performed well in a hot race, literally my whole life. So in Andorra, I begged the team if we could, put some money forward and do some testing. And we did testing, and they were, the scientist came out from University of Bilbao. It was like a whatever master of thermodynamics and all this stuff. And he did it. And he was just like, well, the range is 500 to 1100. He's like, there's no human that can sweat out more than 1100 milligrams of salt. And I'm like, okay, well, you just wait then. And we did like 4 or 5 days of independent days of testing in Andorra, where I was wearing sweat patches, controlling everything, controlling urine. And I was consistently sweating between 1,500 milligrams, 1,700 milligrams if it was over 85 degrees. And so it's been the biggest change for me in performance. And I think it's one of the reasons I did well in the Tour was that I had that locked down. So I was actually taking in enough salt to absorb the water I was drinking. Because for years I knew I sweat a lot, right? Like you can tell when you lose a bunch of water and sweat, and you can tell when you sweat. And I've always been a heavy sweater, but I never knew how much salt I had in it and how much I was losing. And so knowing that now, and now I just take salt pills. I have one of my pockets is just loosely full of salt pills in the race. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just I take, depending on what drink mixes I'm taking, I calculate it all, but I'm taking, 3 to 4 salt pills an hour that are 250 milligrams. And it's made a crazy difference. You can just see it in your heart rate drift in a race. Like in those hot days when it was over 100 and 110 degrees in the Tour, and I was in the break, it's my heart rate drift would be very, very minimal. I would finish the stage doing, very normal heart rate. So it's been a big, big change. So I'll just say hydration.
So Matteo, you said 1,700. Are you trying to replace 1,700, or are you just sticking to?
I'm trying to replace 1,700
per hour. Okay.
It's hard to control in a race, and it's actually not it's 1,700 milligrams. They tell you this number, but it all depends on how much water you take in per hour too. It's all the concentration. So it's a very difficult thing to actually control perfectly in a bike race, because some hours you have more water than others, or more liquid, or whatever. But I was trying to hit 1,500. I was trying to hit 1,500 an hour, and some hours I was going over, some hours under.
Solid. James says, I just finished my A race, super frustrated. I could use some help. My A race is a local Gran Fondo that we all treat more like a race. I've done it for 3 years now, but never followed a structured plan. I was ready to go after a strong 6 months of following a TrainerRoad plan with great consistency. My numbers were great coming into the event, and judging by the past races, I should have been close to winning, but I ended up tying my previous best with a 9th place finish. Interesting, there's no mention of like time here, you know what I mean? Like but more it's just relative to other people with the finish. I think that's a key point to point out here. So instead of winning, ended up 9th. At first, I blamed the training, but looking at the numbers, I didn't even come close to performing like I have been able to in training for months. So I'm left scratching my head and hoping you can help me get to the bottom of what could have happened. I hit my nutrition goal of 90 grams per hour. I felt fresh and ready to go after the taper, and I got great rest for 2 weeks leading up to the event. Only thing that does stand out to me is the amount of nerves I felt. Having actually trained for this year, I knew I'd be in the hunt to win, so that did make me nervous. But other than that, I'm just not sure why I didn't perform like I know I can. Keegan, this one, what would you say here? It's like this dissonance between my ability to perform in training and then on race day when it matters a ton, not being able to deliver that sort of performance.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a tough one. If he thinks he nailed his taper and his nutrition was on, then I mean, I'd say it's probably all in his head. It sounds like just has some mental things to work out and some hurdles as far as like competition's concerned. And maybe he wasn't racing his race. Maybe he was trying to race too much to other people's race, if that makes sense. So instead of like focusing on what he needed to do to perform best, he was like maybe just chasing everyone down and like he just had all this stress. So yeah, I'd say that's the biggest piece. I mean, I think in order to win a race, you have to be really confident, but you also can't have too much stress. You know, you can't be like always riding at the front and, you know, always chasing down these moves and whatnot. So I don't know exactly how this race, what the course, how it plays out, but I mean, that can play a huge part in it. And yeah, I think sometimes if you're the favorite for a race, obviously there's a lot of pressure, and I think you have to find a way to manage that, whether the pressure was on himself or from other people, it's really irrelevant. You just have to find a way to manage it. Yeah, I mean, it seems there's a lot of guys who kind of have that same issue. It seems like there's some riders who can really perform on, you know, training days or group rides, but then they get in a race and they're just too many nerves and they can't seem to find the engine that they have in training. And yeah, I don't really know the best way to crack that nut other than just race more and try and figure it out, you know?
I mean, that's a simple answer, but I think it's actually really productive, like racing more, getting used to that and getting used to the environment certainly.
And maybe that's the best way to do it, you know, or maybe you need to race without your power meter or any data. Maybe you're too data driven. You're focusing too much on it. Maybe you just need to throw that thing away and just race your bike. I don't know. There's not really a perfect answer. You know, it could be, there's so many things that it could be. So it's hard to say exactly one thing.
Yeah. For sure. Matteo, what would you say to this? I'm sure you being surrounded by so many people that raced so much, like you mentioned, all the folks in Europe racing when they're 14 years old, racing all those days. What would you say to an athlete that has a struggle executing to their abilities on race day?
Yeah, I think that is like Keegan said, it's a really complex puzzle. Like your body is not it's not a machine, you know, it's like some days you just can't execute what you can do in training or in another race or what you think your abilities are. But yeah, I would say, that's a hard thing with having one race. That's your objective. And if you don't race a lot, you can't have those nerves. And a lot of times that can be unproductive to have so many nerves and it all based on one day if you don't race a lot. So yeah, I think, a big help would be racing more to get used to that stress and what it's like to perform in a race scenario. And then, it could be like you were saying that he needs to either, throw away his numbers and not look at a power meter in a race, or maybe he was, trying to go too hard in the beginning of a race and went a little too deep. And then,
right. Maybe he needs to look at it more. Yeah,
definitely. Maybe he needs to look at it more and make sure he's not, going over his limits because in the beginning of a race, when you have adrenaline and when you have, you're usually well fueled because the night before you ate a ton and you're nervous and just being nervous for a race that, is your goal, it makes you perform better. And so in the first hour, if you go super deep, and it's very, 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 very easy to do, and you don't even realize it. But if you do that, in the last hour, you'll pay, and you won't even remember that you went so deep in the first hour. So I think that could be, maybe he just needs to look back at his file and see if in that first hour he did a little too much.
Yeah. I see a lot of athletes when they've trained and they have like all-time fitness, right? And they're really doing well. It's easy to race, like you said, pretty aggressively, right, Keegan? Like, because you get to the front and it doesn't hurt as much, and you're excited and you want to make things happen in the race.
It just feels effortless. It's like, even for me, when I did like the White Room FKT, I went out and like, maybe I can do like 350 watts today for 6 hours. Like, yeah, no problem. I got this. And you're like, no, I can't do that. We're going to stick to the plan and we're going to ride 300. Like, so you have to be like, when you have adrenaline and you're just stoked, you can go so much harder than you can without it. You get in that race environment, you can just push yourself so much deeper. So yeah, maybe I think Matteo might have a good point there too. Is just, go back and look at the file and be like, oh, I did 30 minutes of threshold the first bit of the race, and like, no wonder I blew up at the end. So I think it could go either way,
Yeah.
Even if it's accelerations, it's like, it might not even have been a long effort. Like I find a lot of times that I get super fatigued with just doing little sprints that accumulate through a race. Like I can look back and be like, I was way too concerned about positioning for some sector in the first however race, and it's like, those things all add up. And even if in the file you don't see like that you're doing some huge effort where you went to the well, it's like you should look at, on Training Peaks, there's a cool function where you can look at the amount of time you spend in each zone. And a lot of times I'll look at a race and I'll be like, even if you look at a file and it doesn't look crazy, you can look at this thing and how much time you spent, above zone 5. And it's like, if I spend, 20 minutes above 600 watts, I'm going to be paying for that a lot. So I think that's another important thing. You might have just been falling moves like crazy in the beginning.
Yeah,
that's a really good point.
That's we built out that feature. Those take it out of you.
Yeah, we built out that feature in TrainerRoad for that same reason, and you can like custom set whatever that zone needs to be. Because sometimes you'll find like a problem zone where like with your current fitness, you're just not good at a certain thing, and you want to isolate and see where you're at, and make sure that you're not spending too much time in those spots. Easy to underestimate how much time we spend there.
Yeah,
overestimate.
Especially, sure you found that at Cape Epic. Like some days I was like, man, why am I so shelled? There was no sustained efforts, and I go and look at that like how much time I spent in zone 6, and we spent like 40 minutes in zone 6. And I'm like, oh, no wonder I'm shelled. Like that's like, 40 minutes over like 450 watts or whatever. So I think
first hour of every day.
You're just flat out. Like, so I think, you got to look at that and figure out where you're going so deep.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Keegan, one last thing before we end here. What you mentioned that Unbound was 600 TSS. How much TSS?
Let me go look actually. So I don't tell you
how much TSS was 24 hours in the old Pueblo.
I think that one was like eight something. Let me find it for you guys.
Yeah, it's insane.
Unbound.
We've been trying to
curious Everesting what that was.
Yeah, that's a good one. Because that was relatively short for Everesting compared to most folks, obviously, if it was the record, but you were carrying high power for the duration of that. Matteo, are you interested in Everesting or any of that stuff?
No. I was telling Keegan the other day. He needs to get his brain checked out for that. I don't know.
He's broken. He accepts that.
To me, that sounds like the absolute most unpleasant thing I could possibly do in cycling. But no, I'm not interested at all.
What about big gravel races? Are there any in the US that like you would like to do?
I did Unbound last year.
Oh, really?
They had Canyon. Yeah, kind of forced me to do Unbound after the Giro. It was only 1 week after the Giro, so I was pretty shelled. And
so you're already like record shelled going into the Giro.
Yeah.
You do the Giro and then you do.
It was 5 days out. It was a Saturday after finishing on Sunday. It was terrible. I had a really bad experience also with just like, those races they're highly based on I guess your luck. And I just had a bunch of flats and maybe my tires weren't good or whatever. I didn't have everything perfect, but it was just like, it just felt so like the guys that, it felt like the guys that won were just the guys, just like, or guys that didn't crash or whatever. And it was just like, oh, I never want to do this again, but maybe I'll reconsider it in the future. It just felt like it took away a lot of like the competitive nature of racing, because it was just like more survival than anything.
Yeah, for sure.
So Unbound was 6:10.
Whew.
And 24 Hours of the Old Pueblo was 8:27. And it was, what do we do? That's like almost 17,000 kJs.
Oh, 7,000?
Yeah, it was like, high 16s.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty gnarly.
Yeah, those efforts, that one took a lot out of me. It took me like about, I don't know, I probably could have recovered faster had I like just taken some more time off, because I thought I was ready and then I wasn't, and I felt like I barely got recovered in time for Cape Epic. So yeah, it was big. So my 827 TSS in over a few days isn't that big, but I guess when you do it all at once, it leaves a pretty big hole.
I would say it's pretty big no matter what.
Yeah.
800 TSS in a week is like decent.
Yeah,
It's a pretty good week, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Huge
really
week.
good week. All right. Well, Matteo, what's next for you?
I got a Tour of Britain on Wednesday, and then I finished the year with some Italian classics.
Sweet. Well, everyone on the podcast here will be cheering for you. Go follow Matteo
Thank
on
you.
Instagram. Matteo Jorgenson, I think, is your name on there.
Exactly. Yep.
Just as simple as his name. So go follow him on there. Go follow Keegan. Keegan, you have Schwam again? Is that?
Yeah, we got Park City Point to Point this coming weekend.
Ooh,
Should be just kind of a fun hometown race. And then, Schwalm up next.
75 miles and like almost 13,000 feet of climbing. Fun.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it's all trail, you know.
Yeah.
Just ripping.
Yeah.
Like Matteo said, we have all the good. So you just ride trail all day. It's kind of sick.
Yeah, for Keegan. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, good luck to everybody doing Park City Point to Point. Matteo, thanks a bunch for joining us, man. I'm stoked to support you and cheer for you throughout the rest of the year. And we'll talk to you all next time.
Yeah,
That's
thanks
awesome.
both of you guys.
Yeah,
Big
thanks,
admirer.
guys.
So thanks for taking the time, both of you.
Thank you.